Hi, I'm Steve McCord, Cattaraugus County Director of Veteran Services, and this is Our Veterans, Their Stories, preserving our heroes' stories, one story at a time.
I was inducted into the military in September of 1966 in the Army. I did basic and advanced infantry training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, and I scored well on some of the aptitude tests, so they said I qualified for officer candidate school at Fort Benning, which I accepted. I took well to the military, being an athlete in high school and working in a dry cleaners. I knew how to make a bed and fold a sleeping bag. I graduated from officer candidate school, which to my surprise wasn't as difficult as I thought. We lost 2/3 of our class. We started with 220 and I think we graduated 70. I was an infantry officer. I spent a year after that at Fort Lewis, Washington in a training company. I was one of the instructors. I spent a year up there. And then I was assigned to the 1st Cavalry in Vietnam. So I landed in Vietnam in September of 1968. At that time, my division was up in I Corps. The 1st Cavalry just came off of a mission with the Marines to open up the road to Quezon. I missed that, but I came a few months later, and we operated up in I Corps, up in the mountains, for a couple months. And then I remember President Johnson at the time, stopped the bombing of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which allowed more of the North Vietnamese regulars to infiltrate into the southern part of the country. We were redeployed. My division was redeployed down to Tay Ninh city area, Tay Ninh province, with the 25th Division. We took over half of their camp at the time, and we went out and patrolled outside of the Tay Ninh base camp. And at that time, the Army was setting up fire bases that were supporting the main elements. So we went out and set up a fire base, and then out of the company of 4 platoons, we would spend 3 weeks out patrolling and then 1 week guarding the fire base. It was a rotation. And we were there along the Cambodian border from November, around Thanksgiving time. I remember being out into a special forces camp at Khartoum, and then we patrolled along the border after that. Our company took some heavy casualties during that period of time. I was a platoon leader, and when we first went out the day after Thanksgiving, I had 42 men in my platoon. Christmas Eve, we were picked up to go back to division base camp for a rest down, and I think I had 22 men in my platoon. So it was a tough time because the enemy was allowed to infiltrate. We operated in that area for the rest of the tour of my tour of duty. Now, after 6 months, officers usually are rotated back to a rear position, which I was fortunate to be able to do, probably around this time, first part of April. And but then our company got into an ambush, and I was the only surviving officer. The captain was wounded, the lieutenant was killed, another one was wounded. So at the tender age of 21, I was a company commander in the field with a fairly depleted company. Usually infantry company had 175 to 200 men. We probably had about 120 left at that time. And we operated in that area. Then eventually replacements came, and I was relieved as a company commander, and I was allowed to go back to the rear area to fulfill my duties as executive officer. Lucky for me, the few times I was there, we were in multiple firefights, but I was just suffered a couple scratches. I was wounded a couple times, but nothing serious. and I was awarded a Purple Heart, which I was kind of embarrassed to take because I saw men who were really wounded seriously that received the same citation. Everybody was young. We were 20, 21 years old. 25 was probably the oldest of most of the soldiers that were there.
You mentioned President Johnson stopping the bombing along the trail, and it seems to have had a major effect on your unit. Speaking now with retrospect, or even how you felt back then, was that a mistake?
I think it was a mistake. I think we scaled down a little too soon. I think if we'd have kept a little more pressure for another couple years, I think we could have got a better deal. And we might not have witnessed the fall of Saigon in such a tragic manner as we did. But I know there was a lot of political unrest at the time, and public opinion was wearing at the administration to end this war. And
how aware were you in Vietnam of the public unrest over here in America?
Not very.
Not very.
No, I was too preoccupied with what I was doing, and I was a little naive to that. I was 21 years old. Yeah, so I didn't realize the public awareness or public unrest until I came back. And when I returned, I returned on a private flight from Saigon, or I'm not saying Saigon, I'm not sure where I left from, but flew into San Francisco. And when we arrived, they said we'll be landing about 1:30 or 2 in the morning to avoid protesters. And I went, what? What do you mean protesters? Why? So that's how unaware I was of the public sentiment. And of course, the American people lost confidence in the ever-changing regimes in South Vietnam. And even though I felt our mission there was worthwhile, even though there's always opportunists who make money off of wars, I think what we initially tried to do was save a country that wanted to be free from communist oppression. And we were... it was an obligation that we had to do that at the time.
Talk about the pressure of being that young 21-year-old first lieutenant commanding the company. I commanded a battery of 152 at the age of 25 in peacetime, and I know the pressures I was under. I can't imagine being in combat and having that thrust on you before your time, if you will.
In some respects, war is hell, but in some respects, peace is worse. I was very adaptable to that environment. I learned how to fight that war, and I became very good at it. My men really respected my judgment and my ability to lead them. I was very cautious. They always taught us in officer school, your men come before your mission. And I usually always kind of employed that philosophy. Now, we didn't take chances. We weren't sticking our neck out. Even though there were casualties, I wasn't trying to be a Hollywood, hero. But so I got along very well with the men because first of all, because I had been an enlisted man, and I know how they think and how they really viewed officers. And secondly, I had a connection with everybody. I knew a couple kids from Buffalo, and there were kids from Cleveland, and we had a lot in common, all growing up in the 60s. So. Well, the way the 1st Cavalry operated is they would pick us up and we would go on a Charlie Alpha, the combat assault. And we did about 25 of those in the year I was there. And they'd pick us up and we'd fly in helicopters, half a dozen of them for a platoon maybe. And you could see in the distance where they were prepping with artillery. And then as we got closer, the gunships would come alongside the Hueys and strafe the area, and then we would land and deploy. And when we would deploy, I always say, okay, we're going to deploy. And I had 3 squads. So a platoon leader has 3 squads in an infantry company like this. And each squad would deploy in a certain area, and you try to stay abreast, and you move kind of one by one or two at a time while you get supporting fire from the third one. And yeah, you would do exactly as you do as kids. You would say, okay, you go around this side, we're going to sweep up the hill, and if we flush somebody out, you get them, and if we have to pull back, then I'll give you the word to pull back. Then you stayed pretty close, and you had experienced guys. Now, as you see right now with the Russians, they're having trouble because they're all inexperienced. They're brand new. They've never seen anything other than a drill. Well, when I landed there were people who had been there for 6, 8, 10 months. So I had the pleasure, or not the pleasure, but the luxury of learning from them and then gradually taking over, and then new guys coming in. And the new guys coming in were always very receptive. They listened to you, believe me, because they knew what was on the line. And yeah, every situation was a little different in how you would move up or how you would retreat or how you would try to flank an enemy. Nightly, we would set up an ambush, or we would set up a defensive perimeter, either or, depending on where we were and what we expected. Some nights, nothing would happen. Some nights, people would walk into our ambush, and we would deploy, usually with claymores and the machine guns, the way we had them set up. You would set a stake here and a stake here, because it got so dark, you would realize you're not going to shoot past the stakes. You're going to shoot within these two sticks that you have, because it gets so dark and you become disoriented at night. So there's things you learn as you go on day by day, and you do different things.
If you would explain for the people that might be watching this what a claymore is. It's a wonderful little weapon, but I'm not sure everyone knows what it is.
Okay, it's a cone, a U-shaped device, a concave device. The funny thing is, it says point front toward enemy. So when you read it, it's front toward enemy. I put it this way, not the other way. And it has a wire with a little clicker. And you click it, and it explodes, and it sends out, I don't know,
like a shotgun,
1,000 BBs maybe in that area. And they're very effective at night because they don't disclose your position like a muzzle flash would. I don't know if they have muzzle flashes anymore on rifles, if they've been able to suppress it. And it was a good initial way to initiate an ambush. Boom, 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 claymores. And then you could see trip flares. They would go off, and you could see the enemy where they were scurrying to, and then you could open fire on them. Well, we'd go out for about 3 weeks at a time. And you wouldn't change your clothes. You're lucky you got socks. So you'd change your socks, and at night you'd throw down a poncho liner and you'd lay on it, depending on whether you're in an ambush or you're in a defensive position. Bug juice, do you ever see these helmets in the movies with a little bottle up there? That's bug juice, and you spray it all over you, and it keeps the bugs away, and eventually it permeates your skin to the point where you probably don't need it anymore after 6 or 7 weeks. And then you would sleep 2 or 3 hours, and the next guy would take over, and then 2 or 3 hours, and then in the morning you would get up very carefully, because sometimes, and usually if the enemy spotted you and they wanted to hit you, they would wait till just before dawn. And that's when everybody's doing this and going out to the bathroom and opening up their can of food. So that's when you really had to be careful, in the beginning of the day, in the morning, early morning.
How often were you resupplied?
We were resupplied when we needed to be, usually every other day. We would get water and sea rations and mail and ammunition if we needed it. The medic, each platoon had a medic who carried a first aid, all of the necessary equipment to bandage you if you were shot or cut open, or they would have morphine and different things like that. The Army at that time had instant NCO school. At an NCO school where they would, as a matter of fact, a very good friend of mine, Tom Dimitrovic, went to an NCO school while I was going to an officer school, and it was probably a few weeks shorter, but he came out as an E5. And then they taught him exactly what they taught me, how to operate a squad in the combat zone. But the squad being 7, 8, 10 men, maybe. Well, I would deploy them. I had 3 squad leaders, and I would say, okay, you take your squad here. Your squad's on point today. Oh, I had point 2 days ago. Yeah, but you got the best guy, and I don't trust so-and-so today. So they would put their man on point. And normally when we would wake up in the morning and secure ourselves, we would have to go from point A to point B, usually a couple, 3 miles. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but when you're going through the jungle with a machete, it can take 6 hours. Then the point man normally was the front man, then we'd have a single file. And every now and then, if I could, I put out some flank security, but most of the time you didn't because it was so thick that you'd lose them. And so you're following somebody, same distance with me to you, although facing in the same direction, rear guard kind of walking backwards. And the point man would follow we had compass, no GPS, follow compass, or I would have the compass and I would kind of direct him in a certain way so we could stay on course, because you couldn't always go in a straight line. So you're going around creeks and around trees and around ant hills. And I would always tell somebody, tell me how many paces we've stepped. So he would start counting. So he'd go, well, we did 1 kilometer so far. We went 1,500, meters. And so, well, we got to go another 1,500 meters then. And map reading is not a precise science, especially back then. So you were always trying to get to your destination, the destination that battalion would give you to set up. And then sometimes you'd get to that position and you'd want to ensure, so you'd have them send out an artillery smoke round. Now, if you ever notice, well, you'd never say, you'd say again, you don't say repeat. And that was something that stuck with me. And they would fire a smoke round, and you would hope it would land where you thought it was going to be, so you were where you thought you should be. You weren't always where you thought you should be, so you'd have to kind of adjust to where the smoke round went out. A lot of times at night, if we thought it was going to be an active night, we would predetermine some spots with artillery, so when the time came, we wouldn't have to give coordinates. We would just say, give me some fire on coordinate B. And that way we would have it quicker than if we'd say, all right, here's my coordinates, fire at add 50 or drop 30, something like that. It's been so long, I'm kind of just digging in my mind, but it's...
You're doing well, though. It's speaking as the artillery guy.
Yeah,
you give the coordinate, then add 50, drop 30. You're bracketing because you went too far, and so then you're dropping it back down, trying to walk it in on them and such like that. So you're doing well.
Yeah.
So tell me about the communications you had when you were out on patrol. I'm assuming you had Prick 77s, which would only be as good as the battery.
I had an RTO guy, who's this guy in the picture with me. He was 6'7", and we had the 25s. The artillery, we had the radios with the long antennas. What they called the 25, or
back then they were PRC 77s when I was in. So you may have hit a precursor to that.
Well, he was 6'7", and so his antenna was higher than the guy who was 5'8".
Right.
So he carried my radio for me. His name was Warren B. Hyde, and he was good. He was a good radio operator, and but they didn't like the job because of snipers too.
Yeah.
And then he also carried an M16, but he had M16 and a radio and things like that.
How long would the battery on one of those last?
I don't even remember that. That's not something I even gave too much thought to.
But you never ran out of comms because batteries died?
We never ran out because the battery died.
Okay.
If anything, we were out of range. Sometimes we'd go out just with my platoon, and there'd be 35 guys. And then sometimes we'd operate on a company level where there'd be 150 guys. Occasionally, the battalion would sweep an area, and then at night we'd all get together. So there'd be like maybe 3 or 4 companies in a battalion. So I remember a couple times that I felt like real luxury, because now you have 3 companies hooking up out in the field at night, so you could light a fire, you could do a lot of things that you wouldn't do if you had 30 men. And it just depends on the operation and what division was wanted us to do at the time. We were good at going into areas and being able to determine how the enemy strength was and able to engage them properly. We were patient because we were experienced, and we had been doing it for so long that and there's a few times we came upon an enemy base camp where they would only have 20 men guarding it, and we were able to sweep right through, capture a few, kill a few, take their supplies. I even have some pictures of when we did that one. So we were good at that. And plus, the 1st Cavalry was air mobile, so Colonel will call you up and say, okay, be at this clearing in an hour, and they pick us up, and then we're in the plane. Okay, here's where we're going to go. Bravo companies in contact there. We're going to drop you to the south of them, and you're going to sweep along the side and help them get away.
Okay, yeah. How did you find the intelligence, on-the-ground intelligence? And I'm thinking because 1st Cav and the movie We Were Soldiers, that was all predicated on bad intelligence. So was it better? That was 66, 67. You were 68, 69. Did you find the intelligence was better back then, or?
I don't know that I really put that much faith in the intelligence. I always prepared for the worst. At night they'd say, okay, we have a large enemy group coming through your area. Why don't you set up an ambush on this ridge? And we'd take precautions. We'd set out claymores. We'd take an ammo box, fill it with C4, and hope we could create a massive explosion if we had to. We would call that field expediency. And I never really thought too much about the intelligence or relied on it because I didn't think, because it changed so quickly. Yeah, enemy units would come and go and break up, and the enemy would break up into smaller groups if they thought we were going to B-52 an area, so that they didn't have massive casualties. So they probably knew more about us than we did them. There were days when we were surrounded and we took a lot of fire, and luckily we had good artillery support and air support to hold off on a superior enemy force. But you never could just beat feet. You always had to hold your ground and retrograde in an organized manner. Yeah. Yeah, no, you don't just desert and run, and that's sure kiss of death there. North Vietnamese Army was, they were dedicated. They were well trained, I thought. They were fairly well supplied. Let me digress and tell you a joke. There was one NVA, this is a joke that went around. There was this NVA private who went into training for months, and they was ready to ship him out, and they gave him an artillery round, and he ran down the Ho Chi Minh Trail with bombs going off and B-52s. He ends up with his unit 3 months later, gives an artillery round to the guy who fires it at the Americans, and then he turns back to this kid and says, okay, go get another one. So that was, I wouldn't want to be in their army. I would prefer to have been in ours as opposed to what the North Vietnamese did.
I mean, I looked at pictures of them. They look like children.
Well, a lot of them were very young.
Yeah. You got to realize they've been fighting since '54, so they were a lot more experienced.
Yes, they were.
And
they had sappers, who are men who would put explosives on their back and crawl up into an American position and detonate it, kill themselves, and open up the barbed wire so the rest of the men could go in. And a zapper, if you occasionally would shoot one, unless you did a headshot, they'd keep going because they were opiated. And they wouldn't go into shock unless you killed them. That's how determined they were and how committed they were to this war. Where you're not going to get an American to do that. I did write a couple letters to parents saying how their son died very heroically, but not the official letters. No, there was maybe just a footnote. I don't even know if they were used, but I probably only had a half a dozen men in the year. Only, I say only, and that's kind of disrespectful to say that only, but maybe half a dozen men in my platoon company that I was directly responsible for. Well, when you're young like that, you get conditioned. It becomes a way of life, and unfortunately, the human being is very capable of adapting quickly to environments of that nature. I hope, with what's going on now, we never have to experience that. But yeah, we adapt very quickly. And I think a teenager, a 20-year-old, 21-year-old is really quickly, with the survival instinct, takes over. Yeah.
But it comes back to bite you later on because you don't process it. And that's one of the issues. Mm-hmm. Because you survive, live to fight another day. But there is no going back and getting a hot meal. You guys did have the luxury of having warm Budweiser, which is more than what we had. But then the next day you're right back out there.
Yeah.
And if you're out on rotation, you don't even get to go back until the rotation's over. So it makes it exceedingly difficult, and I don't think you do process it at all.
You're out there for 3 weeks, and then you go back to a base camp or fire base, and in the fire base you sleep in a bunker or on a cot, and you do get a hot meal, and you do have a few beers, but then after a week you rotate with the other company, and you're back out for your 3 weeks. There were tanks there, and I'm sure that our armor was used in some areas on some occasions, but we never worked with armor because we were usually too far out and too much jungle. I read a book about the Vietnamese war with the French, and the French had an armored division that was going through the jungle, and the Vietnamese took out the first vehicle, then they took out the second. There were 100 of them, and they went right down the line because they couldn't maneuver. Yeah.
I would think even if you got to rice paddies or whatever where you could maneuver a little bit, they would get mitered in the mud and such, and so, yeah. Mm-hmm. What experience did you have with the tunnels? Did you run into that a lot?
We ran into tunnels, we ran into underground bunker systems. We discovered an area one time, probably the size of the downstairs of my house, that was underground. It was one level below, filled with bags of rice, 25-pound bags of rice, and there must have been 100 of them in this room that the enemy would obviously occasionally, as they would move through, would resupply for food. And the jungle was so thick, you'd be chopping your way along, and then you'd come to a trail that was manicured almost and paved, not paved, but cleared off so you could ride bikes down it. And they would have bamboo mats rolled up on the side of the roads that they could roll down in the monsoon season so that they could travel on it easier. And along the side of this Ho Chi Minh Trail, there was many arteries to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, there were little respites and bunkers that they could go into if bombing started. So they had a series of trails going through the jungle that obviously they used pretty regularly, probably mostly at night. And underground, to go back to your question, I never let my men go into too many of these tunnels just because you don't know what you're going to come across. They're usually booby-trapped. We would throw a CS grenade down there. We'd tell people to come out. If they didn't, we'd throw a gas grenade down there, which is like a tear gas. And occasionally somebody would come out, and I can't remember the name, what they would say in Vietnamese, to surrender, Ho Choi or something, and then we'd take a prisoner or two. But we were teaching them how to fire weapons, how to march, how to throw grenades, how to low crawl properly, firing positions. I know people don't talk about that too much, but there are various positions you fire from. Kneeling position, a standing position, a prone position, and how to throw a grenade. I used to teach a little bayonet training. That was part of it, how to operate with the M4. We were training with M14s and the bayonet. Just regular discipline and following orders, marching, conditioning. Oh, okay. I have good family support. My grandfather was in World War I, my father was in World War II, and I had an uncle. Uncle John was in Korea. So, I had pretty good support system, and I had friends, and a lot of my friends were getting out at the same time, and I went back to college. I went to Bonaventure. That was what I had really planned on doing, was going to get a degree. So I kept busy, and I had purpose, and I think that's what we all need in life, no matter how old you are or what you're doing. You need to keep busy and have a purpose. Yeah.
That's what they all say.
Yeah.
No, really, that's what they all say when they come back. They had things to do.
Yeah. Yeah, we want to get back into your life. Mm-hmm.
If you don't keep your mind engaged, it will drift back to where you don't want it to go. So
Yeah.
that's where the purpose comes in, be it schooling, be it working, be it family and writing a book, something, you got to keep it engaged. Absolutely.
Yeah.